Thanks, Steve. What a great setup. It's all really scary, isn't it, when you hear Steve talk about this threat landscape. And, you hear a lot of that from the cybersecurity community. In fact, you hear a lot of people running around saying the sky's falling in because of cybersecurity. Cyber is just another risk. It's a potential trigger for a business impact in an event, an impact to your government departments, etc. And it needs to be managed like every other risk in your business. You need to be able to understand the risk. Now, that's not easy when Steve talks about the pace of digitalization and the fact that, just every part of our business today is a digital business. There are very few organizations in the world that wouldn't be run by some form of digital capability. So you need to be able to understand the risk. And once you understand the risk, you need to be able to understand what your risk appetite is. For every business, your appetite for risk will be different. Like it is with safety, like it is with market or credit risk, there is no difference. You just need to understand your risk appetite. And like every risk appetite, you'll have a tolerance to it. So if you think about a speed limit on a motorway, the risk appetite would be 70 miles an hour for the motorway. We think that's a safe speed to do, and there'll be tolerance. Everybody knows that, if you travel at 72 miles an hour, the speed cameras in the UK aren't going to catch you. So you need to understand how you can step outside that risk appetite, but make sure you manage within the envelope of your risk tolerance. And with any risk, it starts with accountability. So too many organizations, and I've had the pleasure for working for one of the largest organizations in the world that worked in 80 countries. For too many organizations, they look at a cybersecurity risk as being owned by the Chief Information Security Officer or the CIO. That's a huge mistake. You have to start from the perspective, like every risk, the CEO and the business leadership are accountable for that risk. They don't need to be experts in cybersecurity, but they do need to understand that risk. And the Chief Information Security Officer, people like Steve and I, are there to make sure we apply the appropriate controls to get us to the risk appetite that the accountable leader owns. And I think Cyrus will probably talk a little bit more about that. Cybersecurity is not a technology problem.
Just 2 seconds. I'm terribly sorry for interrupting you now. My experience, we're working quite hard at the moment trying to get cyber awareness programs off the ground in Ireland and cybersecurity problem. My experience is that chief executive officers and chief financial officers in SMEs, for example, they don't have the language around cyber, so they tend to sort of dump it out to the IT people, and not all IT people are cyber people. How do we get over that problem and tie on to that the matter of insurance? We're not going to get cyber taken seriously until the insurance companies say, you have to use a cyber program in your organization and show it to us how you're not covered. But I would like to understand, how do we get the CEOs to have the language that they're confident enough to have a go?
Well, I think it starts with changing the narrative. So the narrative around cybersecurity is militaristic language. It's dark, it's scary. Steve talked about the dark web. That sounds horrible, doesn't it, this thing called the dark web? And when you talk about actors, these adversaries in the environment, they've all got these scary names attributed to them. I think we need to demystify that whole thing. There are some great learning tools. So for boards and for C-suites, the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Council Centre in the UK, provides something called the Board Toolkit. That's a really good way of actually a layman understanding that cyber is just another risk. You do need people who understand it. Of course, you need companies. For a lot of SMEs, and I read somewhere this week that 60% of the ransomware attacks in the US in the first half of the year were against organizations with less than 1,000 people. So this is not just a big company issue. This is an SME issue. You need companies that can take that, you can buy that capability from, because there's currently somewhere between 3 and 5 million vacancies for cybersecurity professionals in the world. So you're not going to have experts, But there are great companies out there. I work for, I won't name them, but I work for some of them that do a fantastic job of being able to aggregate all of those companies and help them develop those cyber programs. The worst thing organizations can do is just throw technology at the problem. This is not a technology, it is a technology issue, but it's not solved by just throwing technology at it. You have to think through the lens of people. You have to think through the lens of culture. I like to use the analogy to the airline industry. So the airline industry's safety record was appalling. If you think back 30, 40 years ago, how did they improve that culture? They improved that culture by creating an open and transparent environment. There's a great book from Matthew Syed called Black Box Thinking that goes into it in detail. But it changes that narrative. So you've got to encourage your IT organizations when there has been an incident, a data breach, or somebody's breached the boundaries of your companies, to feel confident they can speak up and talk about the situation and learn from it. And I think, again, in the cyber community, I read another article from a company, again, I won't mention their name, recently, that said in the last year, 70% of organizations that had been told to hide a data breach. That is not helpful to anybody. Of course, it's breaking all the regulations, but it's not helpful to anybody because we don't learn from it. You know, and that's how the safety culture in the airline, I was in oil and gas, so it's a very dangerous business. That's how we improved our safety performance, and it's how we improved our cybersecurity performance by creating an open and transparent culture where people could actually talk about those issues. So I think we need to demystify it, is that the language. In terms of technology, there are things you can do. There's this concept of zero trust, and you'll hear many organizations tell you that zero trust is a bit of software you can buy from them. It's not. Zero trust is a design principle. You have to think about this notion that you need to continuously verify people as they're in your environment. We used to work in this world where we had closed networks and people had to penetrate, we use the analogy of castle and moat. People had to get into the castle, over the moat to get into the castle walls. That doesn't exist anymore. Everybody is in the cloud. Every single one of your organizations, whether you're government or private organizations, will be using cloud infrastructure. So you have to appreciate that you're on the web and you're a potential target. So you need to continuously verify identity, that the person that is accessing your systems, your data, is who they are. You also need to create a world in your IT world which you limit what I call the blast radius. So you segment your network, so if somebody does get into the environment, you're limiting the damage that they can do. And the one thing about the cyber risk that's different from many other risks, and having worked for BP, you'll know we had a few major accidents in the past, they were all geographically constrained. So when we had the Gulf of Mexico incident, as horrible as it was geographically constrained to that area, albeit the reputational damage was global. With cybersecurity, there are no borders and there are no boundaries. If somebody gets into your network or into your systems, they can pretty much, in most organizations, depending on how good they are, they'll find their way into most areas of your organizations. And for most adversaries don't just break into your network, steal something and run out like they would with a physical burglary. What they do is they sit there and they call it dwell time. They sit there in your environment and they just monitor what's going on. And then they figure out what are the most sensitive assets to cause either a disruption or to exfiltrate from your environment, and then they will execute whatever they are, depending on their motivation, of course. So there are things you can do around technology, but it needs to be a well-formed program. It isn't something you just throw tech at. You need to understand when you deploy technology, you have to build the people capability and the processes. I worked for one large government department that did a great job of doing upgrades to their endpoints. The trouble is they didn't leave behind an operational capability. So within months of actually deploying the latest upgrade of the technology, it was out of date already, and there was no capability to upgrade it. And therefore, that's a bit pointless. You might as well not have done it in the first place. Understanding the risk, the best way to understand the risk is to use technology. So you can deploy platforms out there that very quickly aggregate data from all of these different technology platforms and give you essentially a risk understanding of where you need to prioritize your activity. Most organizations' IT landscapes are so vast, you have to figure out what's most important to you, but not from a technology perspective. You start from business process. What are the most important things your business are there to do? So in a bank, you'll have a key business process you need to do. You need to map that IT landscape to that business process and protect those assets over the things you care less about, because most organizations can't secure everything in one go. And, you know, one of the things I like to talk about is operational resilience, and I think I am going to hand over to Cyrus at that point too. Thank you.